So, is gameplay all that matters? Alright, if you're watching this, I assume you're at least slightly interested in video games. Or else, the fuck are you even doing here? And if you have an interest in video games, you most likely have already heard the expression, gameplay first. More and more, I've seen the expression thrown around in an attempt to excuse flaws in other aspects of a game. Today, I want to take the time to dissect this concept, explain where it comes from, what we use it for, and make a clear case that gameplay first doesn't mean no story or ugly visuals, and that neither should it. First thing first, I think that if we want to understand what gameplay first actually means, we need to understand what gameplay actually is. So let me ask you a question. If you try to think about all the different entertainment medium you know, which one of those possess the following characteristics? Which of them has a plot? I think video games have plot, cinema has plot, so does literature, stage play, and one could argue that music can have a plot as well. Now, which of those medium has characters? Well, video games has characters. I think it's clear that cinema also does, literature as well, and most definitely a stage play. So I guess that means music goes away. Now, let's think of unexplored worlds, places that you can only visit through those mediums. I'd argue that video games have them, so does cinema and literature. I think we can skip the stage play for this one. The next characteristic is visual support. I think video games clearly has a visual support. Cinema also does, but I think literature can go. With a book, you need to make the images in your own head. It's not supported by the medium itself. Now, let me ask you another question. We can see that games and cinema have a lot in common. But, in one word, what would be the single characteristic that make them stand apart? Well, that's interactivity. The one characteristic that sets gaming apart is interactivity, the way it reacts to your action. No other medium offers that, and that's why it's core to any video game. So, what is gameplay, do you ask? Well, gameplay simply refers to all the different means with which the player can interact with the game. Main character walking? That's gameplay. Jumping? Gameplay. Swinging a sword? You guessed it. Gameplay. But it doesn't stop there. Selecting options in a menu? That's gameplay too. Clicking on a card? Gameplay. Making a choice in a dialogue? Also gameplay. Because those are all ways you have to interact with the game. You can have a whole game where you only walk around and observe the scenery while being told a story. Or a game based almost solely on dialogue choices, and those experiences still have gameplay, because you can interact with them and they react accordingly. Now, I think we've defined gameplay well enough. So I ask you, what does gameplay first mean? Is it that the only thing that matters is the way I interact with the game, no matter what it is? Like, the game can be a big pile of shit, but it doesn't matter if the means to interact with it are fun and comfortable? Well, I like to believe the answer to that is a big no. A game is more than solely the ways you can interact with it. You need to actually want to interact with it, and that engagement can stem from various elements. You can have an engrossing story that keeps you motivated. You can have a mysterious world full of surprises you can discover. You can have a beautiful landscape you wish to lose yourself into. You can have a melody that cradles you. Things as simple as a satisfying sound effect can make you smile and keep going. There are so many different elements that can be used to create engagement so that you're compelled to use gameplay to interact with them, and they are all equally important. But if all aspects of a game are equally important, I ask again, what does gameplay first even mean? Well, simply that since gaming's core differentiative is interactivity, the ways the player interact with the game should be at the core of everything else. When you start designing a game, you shouldn't ask yourself what you want to show or tell the player. You should ask yourself, what do you want them to do? The core of your game is its fantasy. What do you want the player to be and feel like? Do you want him to be a solitary knight hunting monsters? Or an astronaut exploring the stars? A bank robber in a shootout? Or an NHL player in the series? Then, you can start thinking about what categories of actions would allow the player to live that fantasy. You can think of them as core pillars from which will emerge all the different interactions we'll have in the game. As an example, let's take the solitary night hunting monsters. Now, what categories of interaction themes can I build the game around for the player to feel like that lone hunter? I would argue you need cool navigation to stalk and overtake your prey. So you can consider navigation one core pillar. Then, I want to feel cunning and clever finding my prey, which would definitely require some investigation mechanics, so that I can track my prey in the wilderness and find clues on various crime scenes. So here, I say the pillar would be investigation. Finally, I need ways to feel cool and empowered when confronting the monsters. So here, we'll take combat as a core pillar. Now that we have defined strong pillars, we can start building our gameplay. Let's talk about different mechanics that would relate to navigation. Walk, run, of course, but it's important to think about it and figure out how it should feel. How much animation blending time, how much acceleration, max sprint speed, minimum walk speed, all of those are important. Then a jump, that would be nice, but how high, how far? A ledge hang, but from stand, from jump, from both, from hang, can you drop or climb? Then it would be nice to have some parkour abilities, tree running, parkour on rooftops, a Zelda-style climbing everywhere mechanic, and to finish with navigation, let's add a rope swing just because it's cool. Now let's get into the investigation pillar. What could be cool? Let's say a smell ability that lets you remember a specific scent and follow it, and maybe a first-person view so that you can look closely at details in a room or a crime scene, and then an interact function, get feedback on the details you spot, and then combat. Let's not get into too many details yet, but let's say we want melee combat and ranged attack, probably with a sword for the melee, and let's say a slingshot for the range, because it's more original than a bow. Okay, if we were making a real game, we'd need to get into way many details than that, thinking about all the different mechanics the player can use to interact with the world and define very clear metrics for every single one of them. But we don't have all week, so let's skip that. Now it's cool to have all those actions possible in the game, but you won't have an actual interaction until you've got something to interact with. And that is when we start talking about gameplay ingredients. A gameplay ingredient is simply an object that will react to an action from the player. A P-switch? That's an ingredient. A rupee? Ingredient. An ammo crate? Another ingredient. Even an enemy is a form of ingredient, but which we usually handle in its own category because they have the unique characteristic of being able to act on their own without needing an action from the player to react to. So in our game, for each mechanic, what could be an interesting ingredient that would be cool to interact with and that would respond appropriately to the player's actions? For the mechanic of smell, we could have blood, putrid flesh, a stew cooking somewhere, or why not poop? For the jump, well, if we have a jump, we need pitfalls or high ledges. For the parkour ability, we need platforms, beams, poles, climbable surfaces. For the rope swing, we need anchor points with large gaps. For the melee combat, we can have breakable doors, bushes, fence, crates. Then, you can do the same thing with enemies. So you can try to think of enemies that would complement one or several of our mechanics. For the smell, why not a putrefied zombie who smells really bad? For the first person, maybe an enemy with a very specific weak point that you need to find by observing. For the interact, why not have a weakened state on the enemy during which you can interact to perform an amazing finisher move? For the walk run, why not an enemy you need to chase? For the jump, maybe you've got a strong enemy that you need to jump over him to attack his back. The rope swing, maybe you've got an enemy you can grab onto and they drag you around. Now that we know what we can do in the game, we can start thinking about my favorite part, the objectives. What we need now is a strong gameplay loop. A gameplay loop is a repeated set of interactive action that react into triggering another loop. We should usually focus our core gameplay loop on the core pillars that we established earlier, since all of the game's features will be based on those. So we have investigation, navigation, and combat. So I would suggest to start with a simple loop. You arrive in an unknown area, find a murder scene, investigate the murder scene, use navigation skills to follow a trail from that scene to the culprit, usually a monster, fight the monster as a boss, and unlock a new area that will lead you to a new crime scene. Now that we have a skeleton, it's time to get into the meat of things. We have several fun mechanics, but we need an actual world to use them in. And that's when we start thinking about the setting. If we look at all the mechanics we came up with, we need to think about a setting which will allow us to use them organically. For example, we want to focus on fast-paced parkour, crime scene investigations, and breakable environments. Well, maybe making the game in the middle of a desert isn't the best idea to leverage those. I'd suggest we need villages separated by forests and have fast-paced parkour navigation highways linking investigation setups to fight arenas. But then, you need to think about how it should look. What would better fit the experience the player would have? So, let's make this in a mountainous region with villages scattered across mountains, separated by a dense forest. We also need to think of inspirations for the form our world is going to take. We need mountains, villages, and forests, so I guess a Norse setting would make sense, or maybe ancient China. But I humbly think there are enough games in those settings. Instead, let me propose to base our world on South America, and more precisely, the Andes, where we can have mountainside villages, dense forests, and even ancient ruins filled with traps. Now we need to decide how everything is going to look. That's art direction. How should we define art direction? Again, think about what the player will do, and how they're supposed to feel. Since there will be a lot of platforming and precise mechanics, I think the best would be to go towards stylization over photorealism, so that every important gameplay element in the environment can stand out, without the need for yellow paint or intrusive UI. But you're supposed to feel like a strong and cunning predator, so I wouldn't make it straight up with colorful cell shading. Maybe a middle ground. Something like the first Berserker Kazan. Something stylized, but still with some grit to it. Now, of course, this design process is not a one-way road. You should be going back and forth between each level, as you gain more insight as what type of game you're making. For example, now that we know our main gameplay loop, and know that we'll be dealing with an Andes-inspired setting, we can go back to our various features and give them form. First thing, the solitary knight hunting monsters. He can now be something much more interesting than a standard European knight. We can make him an Inca warrior instead. Instead of a standard broadsword, let's give a choice between 3 styles of combat: a spear, an axe, and dual daggers. Then for the enemies, we can take the putrefied zombie who smells really bad and make it into a pistaco, and make its smell be the fat it collects from its victims. For the enemy that you need to chase, make it a Muki, and you need to chase it through an obstacle course and corner it in a mine. And the strong enemy you need to attack from the back, make it a carbuncle, which has a mirror shield, and you need to jump over it to attack its back. Now, if we were making a real game, we'd make that exercise for every single feature. But we don't have all week. And now, ladies and gentlemen, the moment you've all been waiting for. We need a strong motivation for a player to want to engage with our loop and our world. And that is when we start talking about the narrative. So, like I said, we need a character and a story that will encourage the player to engage with our loop and our world. Well, I can start writing a story willy-nilly about my own personal feeling about the modern corporate system, even if it's a topic that greatly speaks to me. No, that wouldn't make sense, and it wouldn't serve the player experience. But that doesn't mean I can't think of another story for which I'll be just as passionate. Our fantasy is to be a lone wolf Inca warrior hunting folklore monsters. And our gameplay loop is about finding those monsters, hunting them, and killing them. So what type of story would better serve that context? Well, there are literally infinite possibilities. But for the sake of simplicity, for this exercise, I think we'll go with a good old revenge tale. Amaru, a lone Inca warrior whose village and family were decimated by a horde of vile creatures, goes against the orders of his shaman. He forsakes his name and moves on to become a lone hunter, spending day and night seeking creatures to decimate, with the faintest glimmer of hope that one of them might turn out to be the same white-furred beast which ripped out the throat of his wife and children. He finds a clue, a peculiar medallion, which guides him through a dark and perilous journey, hearkening back to the past of his people and the secret pact the first shaman made with the demons. As he realizes the truth about his shamans orchestrating the monster attacks as a sacrifice to prevent a demon invasion, he learns about himself and his people, understanding that the path he walks is a dangerous one, and that by satiating his thirst for revenge, he might bring forth the end of the world. So you see, we defined an art style, wrote a story, which I honestly got passionate about while writing it, and created a world all based on the gameplay, and making sure everything makes sense and serves the player experience. We even went back to tweak our gameplay feature when the overall game experience became clearer. None of those elements should be dismissed or sidelined. They all work together to create the experience and make you live the fantasy of being a lone monster hunter. So now that we know what gameplay first actually means, why should we go with it? Well, for two main reasons. The first one, we already covered it. It's because it's the main differentiating characteristics between a movie and a game. What we don't want is to make a game that will be more fun to watch than play, or that you feel you're playing, but then take breaks to watch an episode of a good TV show. If that's your game, why even bother playing? Just watch a streamer or cutscene compilation on YouTube. The other reason is because gameplay is the more complex thing to nail down. Finding a fun gameplay loop and making a game that's comfortable and engaging to play is extremely hard. So if you're locked into a specific narrative flow, but realize later you need a tutorial, but the script is locked and the lines are already recorded, you're kind of screwed. You need to rely on text or bring the actors back for reshoots. Or if you build a fantastic world first, without knowing what you want to do in it, well, you'll have nice screenshots, I guess, but when you realize the world doesn't fit with the mechanics at all, and the game is boring, or worse, annoying to play, you'll have to scrap everything and start over. Oh, believe me, I've seen that happen times and times again. If you've ever wondered why a game costs so much to make, well, that type of do-over is a large part of that. So that's it for today. I hope you found something interesting in there, and that you better understand the relationship between the various aspects of a game. Everything is important, and all the pieces need to fit together to create the best possible experience for the player, who wants nothing more than to live through a vivid fantasy. As always, thanks for watching, and see you next time.